Hi, everyone. I'm James Garbutt.
And I'm Denny Dumas.
And this is the Garbutt Dumas Real Estate Podcast.
I guess the idea behind this podcast was just kind of share a few things about how the listing strategy, if you're planning to list in the second half of the year, in the fourth quarter of 2021, how that strategy kind of adjusts comparatively to planning a sale for early next year or into the spring. But let's maybe...
Sorry, man. I was going to cut you off. Keep going. You're in a good place.
Let's quickly just kind of summarize who is selling right now, who would sell a property later into October, November, December.
Yeah. I mean, why would you sell now? I mean, an obvious answer, and what we're seeing in this crazy hot market is because you've bought something. So, when the market is climbing, right now we're more demand than supply, and oftentimes people are taking the leap to buy first. So a very good reason to sell in October or November or even December is because you purchased a place.
Yeah.
Once we get to December, though, oftentimes the conversation is it may make sense to wait till January. But in this market, for certain products, I don't know if it makes a difference. So a motivated seller that's purchased something, very good reason to sell. And then there's the opportunistic seller that has maybe an extra investment property or doesn't plan or just wants to sell their home and rent or relocate. And in either scenario, the conversations we're having with those clients are a little different this time of year than the conversations we'd have with them in January, February, March. Mm. So,
I mean, it's important to note that there are a lot of people out there, and the media kind of starts these thought processes, but a lot of people out there think that Greater Vancouver is in some sort of bubble that is going to end at some point. And so it's important to note that in a lot of neighborhoods right now, for multiple different product types, we're seeing all-time peak pricing. So I think that is also a motivator to sell, that someone who maybe has been thinking about downsizing for the last couple of years sees their neighbor sell for a price that they thought was a ridiculous number. And so that is some motivator as well at this point in the year.
Oh, absolutely. I think
inventory is just so low. There's nothing available that if you sell right now, you're going to probably get a pretty good number.
Yeah. And I think we should be clear to the opportunistic seller. We don't know if this fall is good, but we don't know if it's better than next spring.
Yeah.
And many people have heard me say, when you don't know the market, sell in May or sell in June. May and June have been the lucky months in normal times. But in a climbing market like this, every month gets better. So that would have been the wrong strategy this year. But, you can't predict the future.
And even I remember looking back to the late spring of this year doing a podcast and predicting what was going to happen this fall. And I think our thought was the inventory is too low, the demand is too high for there to be any sort of decrease in prices. So we think it's going to kind of be steady for the rest of the year with potentially a slight increase. And I think it's gone better in terms of housing prices than we anticipated.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard to predict, right? Like whenever we're going through a spring and someone contacts us on, June 27th, and they're debating whether or not to list, in the first week of July or hold on to the fall. It's a bit of a coin flip often in most years, but looking back, obviously, you're probably making an extra 10% on your return by waiting till late September than you would have if you sold in late June.
August tends to be the it seems to be like the second slowest month, or at least the slow month of the summer anyway. So what was unique this August is it was a slower month in terms of listing volume, and it was backed up by a few months that had lower listing volume than normal as well. And the supply the supply dried up, and the demand kicked it up. Mm-hmm. And this August did have a noticeable transition for desirable, houses and townhouses. Mm-hmm. So and that can happen in the fall too. Like as I look at the months ahead, oftentimes sellers need a reason to sell. And that reason is because they want to buy something. And when you see a low supply of listings to buy, that means a lot of sellers want to hold off on selling until they find something. So it in turn causes this spiral effect of low supply.
Yeah.
That will loosen up eventually, and the market can change fast. It's proven that many times in the past. But I would suspect that we're not going to see a buyer, I guess the market change in the buyer's favor until at least next summer. There's a lot of pent-up demand.
Totally.
So I think it would be good to kind of highlight some of the key differences with a listing strategy at this time of the year versus, say, in the new year, like the fourth quarter of a year versus the first quarter of a year. There's a lot of factors we have to consider. It's time is of the essence. December is coming. Rarely do we suggest listing in December unless you have to. I mean, oftentimes January will have a better outcome than December, with the exception of terrible weather. But the one positive of a December is that there's very little supply available. So if you do list in a December and there's nothing available, you might be the shining listing of that week. This is a weird market, so don't take any of this as absolute advice. But a conversation we often have with sellers is, if you're going to list now, we have to move fast. And the conversation we're having in January, February is, we have lots of months ahead of good market. We can be experimental. We can take our time. We can do a coming soon initiative for a week before we list it. Maybe paint your bathroom. Maybe pressure wash your walkways. And right now it is, we got to go. Don't worry about the little things. Timing, honestly, timing sometimes matters more.
That first conversation with a seller, if we're meeting them, today, whatever it is, October 13th, versus if we're meeting them late January, early February, there are so many different points of advice and strategy that we kind of chat about. And that was kind of the purpose behind this podcast. But that's a really great one that I didn't even think of until you mentioned it, is we're suggesting maintenance. When we're meeting them in January, February, we're saying, okay, well, this needs to be done here, touch up the baseboards, be a good idea maybe to redo the carpet in this room if you have the funds to do so. The carpet's kind of beat up, whatever it is, versus if we're meeting someone today, it's usually, don't worry about that carpet. Don't worry about those baseboards. How quickly can we do photos? Can we do them tomorrow and list on Monday?
There's nothing available.
Yeah.
Get up.
So that's a great point that I didn't even think about. The marketing strategy changes just in terms of the time. So often in the early part of the year, even earlier than spring, we're doing photos, video, floor plan, all our marketing material a week or more in advance of actually listing the property. Sometimes we just do it early in the year just to have it and just start throwing sneak peeks out there in the, understanding that the seller is potentially going to sell in April or May. And we're really at that point just kind of waiting for the market to heat up or, the weather to get a little bit better or whatever it is. But go ahead. That
was a very good point. The pre-photos.
Yeah.
We've done that with a number of clients. Monica did that with those clients that had the townhouse in Quillam.
Yeah.
If you are a seller and the idea of selling is stressful to you, a great way to ease up some pressure is if you have a month where, you have time to make your home look perfect, we can always get photos, or a realtor can always get photos done early and wait and hold those photos until you find something to buy.
Yeah.
And that just gives you a little extra time. And when we're planning a listing, we plan from the photo shoot forward. But if you buy something, you already have the photos in place, then you just have to spiff up your place for the first showings. And that could be the difference of getting your place ready for photos and getting it ready for showings is probably, they could be a week or two apart. And that extra week or two could matter a lot.
Totally. And comparing that to this time of year, often our conversations with new sellers right now is how quickly can we get this going? We want to take advantage. We know that the market is super active right now, but we don't know when that turn is going to happen. And we've seen years where that happens late October, early November. We've seen years that the activity carries through December into January. So in the idea of not necessarily knowing exactly how this fall market is going to play out for the next couple months, it's often, let's take advantage of right now because there's very little available. And we just don't know, every day that goes by, the sun is going down earlier. The weather is getting worse. It's getting more rain and rain. So
a couple things to consider more this time of year than say in June is look at that weather report. That weather report is part of the listing strategy. That weather report is part of the first showings.
Yeah.
First showings, to me, are best when it's light out. So if you have a listing, if you take on a new listing and you do first showings on a Thursday at 7 p.m., your most anxious, excited buyers that are coming through the door are seeing it in dark. So as the days get shorter, oftentimes that you want to heavy load those weekend afternoons and get people in when it's bright. In addition to that, there's the offer presentation. So we plan a listing based on, okay, well, how soon can we do photos? And for a detached home, photos is really, okay, we have photos Thursday, we can list on the Monday and do offers the following Monday or Tuesday. When it comes to strata, it's photos and strata documents. So we want the best possible outcome, and it's hard to get the best possible outcome with strata properties if you don't have the strata documents available before offers. So oftentimes we'll look at, okay, when are photos and when will we have the strata documents, and let's plan for offer presentation after those strata documents, and then look at the weather and be willing to change the strategy if the weather changes. The weather is important. First impressions matter. But sometimes this time of year, you're at the mercy of bad weather no matter what.
On that weather topic, I think that's really important. There's often times in the earlier part of the year where we get a bad weather day and we just cancel photos. We say, okay, we'll do it next week. We're not in a hurry. We can postpone. The longer we wait, hopefully the better the market gets. Versus late in the year, often it is what it is. The weather looks like crap for the next 7 days. It's going to rain. So let's just get photos done and list next week because the timing is more important.
And I think a real obvious one would be like a view condo would be a great example. If you do a view condo and the first time people are coming through it, they can't see the view. You're kind of underselling that place. So it is frustrating. It's part of where we live and the season we're in. But oftentimes you can make adjustments on the fly that will lead to a better outcome. And even if you have a direction on offers for Monday or Tuesday, you can always make that change if needed.
Totally.
Always think, what is the best for this listing? What is the best for the seller?
The last thing just to note that I think is really important that maybe a lot of consumers don't necessarily take into consideration until they're in the situation is longer completion dates. It's pretty normal once we kind of get into October for sellers and buyers to want that completion date to round into the new year. A lot of people don't like moving around Christmas time and avoid the whole month of December in general. Like we've already had a number of completions that are late January, which you don't typically see that length, that 3.5 to 4 month length when you're selling and buying in the spring.
If you do a December closing, do it early. And I think this is more for realtors because it's, oftentimes when sellers are looking at an offer, it's just overwhelming. They don't know which details to focus on. But as realtors, we know dates. We know how to make it easier for a client. And being mindful of the dates that work best for a buy and sell, close on the buy, then close on the sell, then give it a few days, then, get keys on the buy as soon as possible, then hopefully have a couple of days before you give up keys on the sell. Those date conversations, if you don't put thought into them and you don't think of their situation, that move can be very stressful. That move could be a rush in one day. That move there could be a gap with hotels needed. But oftentimes I find they can be avoided. And it can be much better if you just really take a step back and ignore the price for a moment, but do these dates. Will this lead to a smooth move?
I agree. It's important to think about all these things. I know a lot of consumers don't necessarily think about this kind of stuff later in the year, but the strategy definitely changes. The timing is ultra important this late in the year, but the market is still crazy. So if you're planning a move, it might be a really good time.
Yeah, have that chat.
Yeah.